Today we're going to talk about flash fiction. If you've never heard of it or been exposed to it before, it's simply fiction that flashes before you. You can definitely read it within one sitting, sometimes in just a few seconds. The diverse refers to the authors. So far in this unit, you've probably read Dead White People. So we wanted to diversify and read some living authors of color. In this presentation, we'll talk about some of the definitions and characteristics of flash fiction. We'll see some examples, and in the PDF version of this, I'll link a story that you can read if you'd like. And then also, we'll have our assignment, and I'll just give you a brief overview of the stories and the authors. I love this photograph because to me, it captures what flash fiction is all about. Flash fiction is like a photograph that captures one moment in time or a bigger story. And what better way to represent that than a picture of a light that is here once and then it's gone? What you probably already read before I even started talking is the first six word story. It was considered the first flash fiction story, and it's attributed to Hemingway, but it's not been confirmed. In fact, most people don't believe that he's the one who wrote it, although it appeared at a time when he was writing. But just think, these 6 words tell a story. It tells a story about maybe the baby, but more so the mother or the father or the family. There seems to be a beginning, middle, and an end. And what's interesting and what's representative of this is that it leaves so much to the imagination. You know, what happened to the baby and what has happened also to the couple. And our unit is about silences and secrets. And again, that just sort of mirrors what we're talking about here. There is a professor at University of Alabama who writes flash fiction, and he came up with this definition, which basically is a non-definition. But he says this form flash wants play. It can't be categorized. It can't be taught. It knows not to know. Now, most people agree that flash fiction is just fiction of extreme brevity. And most would argue that it hints at a bigger story. But we're going to try to define it, even if Dr. Martone says that it's hard to define. So we can mostly all agree that flash fiction is brief, incredibly brief sometimes, anywhere from 5 to 1,500 words and all the way up to 2,000 words, perhaps. There's 6-word stories. There's dribble, which is 50 words. Drabble, which is 100, Twittiture, 280 words, and then the rest of what follows are also known as flash fiction. Short shorts, nanotales, micro stories, postcard fiction, napkin fiction, and sudden fiction. Flash fiction usually has a surprise at the end, whether it's a phrase or a sentence or just a plot twist at the end. It's incredibly sparse, but it has a big impact. Usually, flash fiction only focuses on 1 or 2 characters and only one scene or one moment. And often it's just in first person. Other characteristics are that they have interesting titles that are compelling. Sometimes the titles are longer than the stories themselves. Definitely flash fiction is exciting. It's not always about violence, but it often contains violence. It's edgy, it's thought-provoking, leaves us on edge or unsettled. They're definitely not always feel-good stories, but the whole thing is that it makes you think, which is always a good thing. Flash fiction shows rather than tells. It's without the flowery language that perhaps you're used to with writers like Fitzgerald. Everything is about making the point, so to speak. It's about movement. It's about progressing the story. Every action, word, phrase, or punctuation is used to advance the story. So how do writers advance the story? By use of diction and imagery. Basically what all writers use, words and images. The emphasis is placed on movement. Each sentence must peel back a new layer that wasn't visible at first. So think about Shrek, right? So he says that ogres are like onions and you have to peel back the layers. And we find out that Shrek is not just a, mean old grumpy ogre who lives in a swamp, but he's also courageous and kind and sensitive. And that's a lot like these stories. You have to peel back and see what else you can find. If a line or even a word doesn't progress the story or reveal more about a character, it probably won't belong in this medium. Now, the next slide I want to prepare you, it's a 3-word title, but only a 4-word story written by Joyce Carol Oates. And I think it's brilliant because I don't think she could have done it any other way. Widow's First Year by Joyce Carol Oates. I kept myself alive. So what's interesting is that it's not I somehow kept myself alive, or she didn't list what she did, but the sparsity reveals her state of mind, that she's full of shock and numbness, and she's obviously dealing with stress and trauma. And when you're in that sort of position, you can't really pair things, or you can't really pin things down in your mind. It's always swirling, and she does an amazing job just capturing that. Now, this is where I told you that you can click here to read this story, but we won't take the time in this presentation to do so. But this is a great short story to introduce you to flash fiction. It was originally called Little Things, and you'll notice that there is lacking quite a bit in the story. Quotation marks, adverbs, even names, which usually writers do because they could represent anybody. Perhaps you'll see that the style, that there's sparse description, but it's very symbolic. And whenever you see anything repeated in flash fiction, it's incredibly important. Also consider, if you read it, what happens to the couple and what happens to the baby. Now, here is your assignment. You'll choose one of these 3 stories here. The first one is called Girl, and it's about 650 words, and it's a how-to or a to-do list of what a girl hears from her mother. It's also interesting because it's written in second person, which you probably have never read before. And it's also 1 sentence. If you'd like, you could choose to read from the excerpt There by Native American writer Tommy Orange. The novel is sparse in description in the sense of the characters, because all the chapters are characters, but there's a little interlude in the middle of the book, and this is where this excerpt comes from, where he describes and talks about what natives or Native Americans, what their plight has been and what they still go through. The third story is called Weddings and Beheadings, and it's by a British and Pakistani writer. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's about a cameraman who films Iraqi executions of Westerners instead of doing the art films that he would like to do. Again, keep in mind of what these characters are keeping silent, what they're keeping hidden from us. And so who is silent? And what is he or she encouraged to be silent about? And most importantly, what are the repercussions of this silence?